In a moment, she'll have the opportunity to put questions to our guest. But without further ado, our guest is the London-based Australian author Kathy Lette, who put the chick into chick lit, the puberty into puberty blues, who recently revealed that her son Julius was on the autism spectrum, and who shares a home with husband Jeffrey Robertson. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kathy Lette to 1+1.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you.
Kathy Lette, welcome to 1+1. You were rebellious, you were a wild young woman, you left school by the time you were 16.
Yeah.
What happened? Because I get the feeling that you would have been someone who would have loved to have gone to university and learned things.
Definitely. I mean, I always say that the only examination I've ever passed is my cervical smear test. But it is true. I mean, I did leave school way too young, but I was so bored and I was so desperate to get out into the world and experience it all. But I got an honorary doctorate a couple of years ago from Solent Southampton University, and that was the highlight of my life, you know, to go down there. They rang me up and said, what size head measurement, you know, what for the cap? And I said, well, my head was much smaller before you told me I was getting an honorary doctorate. And the best thing was I got the doctorate from Southampton, which is, you know, just near from where my convicts came out on the first and second fleet, because I am, you know, the creme de la creme. So I thought if my convict ancestors could have seen me, they'd be rattling their chains with mirth. But on the serious side, having left school so young, as a writer, the one good thing is you don't write with a host of ghosts looking over your shoulder, because all my literary friends who've got many degrees, they're so anxious to be like Proust or Tolstoy that it sort of inhibits them, where I just write whatever's bubbling up inside me. It makes you less inhibited, I think.
You were a big fan of Spike Milligan.
Yes, that's right.
And in fact, you were a bit of a groupie, weren't you? You followed him around to different venues.
Yes.
He met you.
Yes.
He put you up in hotels. He mentored you.
He did. I mean, you remember Spike Milligan. Oh, wonderful. When I read all of his books and his poetry, I just fell madly in love with him. So my girlfriend and I, we were probably 16. We used to hitchhike around Australia following him. And wherever he was, we'd just turn up, you know. And we befriended him, and he was so kind. And he read the book we were working on and gave us encouragement. He put us up in hotels. It was like having a sugar daddy without the sex, a sort of saccharine daddy. You know, and he was just so... And when you're a teenager, all you want really is for an adult to see your potential and take you seriously and not treat you as though you've got the IQ of plankton.
You didn't get that from your parents?
Well, at the time, the generation gap was so vast. It was like the Grand Canyon, wasn't it? I mean, I remember even when all the kids... Adults couldn't understand why their garden hoses were getting shorter. They thought they were shrinking. And, of course, all we kids were cutting them off to make bongs, you know, which they didn't know. I mean, there was just such a generation gap. So even though, you know, we loved our parents, we felt we couldn't really talk to them. And I don't think it's until you have your own children that you really appreciate your parents and you really develop that loving, deep, profound bond, because then you understand all the terrible things they went through on your behalf. So, yes, we didn't relate then, but we do now.
Now, I just need to ask you a point of clarification. The person you wrote Puberty Blues with, was it Gabriel Carey?
Yes, yeah. We were best friends, yeah.
You wrote that when you were about 19.
Well, we wrote it earlier than that. It was published when we were 19. Anne Summers got it published, actually. It was rejected by lots of publishers, but she's the one who sent it to McPhee Gribble, which was a small feminist publishing house in Melbourne, and they published it.
You were later described like this: Kathy embraced fame while Gabriel chose to live among life's battlers. Is that a fair description? Did you embrace fame?
I don't know if that's how I would put it. I think, first of all, we had a wonderful friendship, because I always say that, you know, Australian women are each other's human wonder bras, uplifting, supportive, making each other look bigger and better, don't you think? Australian women, that wonderful sense of camaraderie we have. So we had a fantastic friendship. And I don't know whether we would have survived that whole puberty experience if we hadn't had each other. You know, we could buoy each other up, and, you know, that's why we got the surfboards and went surfing. We were rebellious and what have you. I'm a big believer in seizing the moment and going with whatever the luck that life throws you. Yeah, I think you should always seize the day. So whatever opportunities came my way, I took, because of course life also deals you some very bad hands. So why not have as much joy and fun as you can? So yes, when I got a chance to go and live in LA and write on sitcoms, I took that opportunity. You know, when I got a chance to be the write-in-residence at the Savoy Hotel, that was better than winning the Booker Prize. You know, I took that chance. So yes, I would always say seize the day.
What kind of sitcoms did you write?
Well, there was a very big, famous show in America called The Facts of Life. It was bigger than MASH. It was massive. Have any of you know it? Do you know what I'm talking about? And I'll tell you a funny story, actually, because when I was working on that show, we had to cast a love interest for one of the main characters, and I cast this unknown actor called George Clooney. I'm not kidding. And he asked me out, and I said no. I said to him, I don't go out with actors. You put other people's words in your mouth when you never know where they've been. And then years later, I was in London, I had 2 babies, I was married to Jeff, I was covered in vomit, hadn't slept for years. And one of my writer friends was visiting me from LA, and ER was on in the background. And I'm going, oh, look at that Dr. Ross, isn't he gorgeous? I could swim through a pool of my own drool to get to him. And he said, but that's the guy you cast, that's the guy who asked you out, that's George Clooney. And I'm just like, ah! I lay in the fetal position and sobbed for 2 weeks. Wouldn't you? Although I thought I might ring him now and say, oh, George, about that date, I've had time to think it through. I think it's why he never got married. Yeah. So I wish I'd seized the day on that particular occasion. Yeah.
Did you decide to move to the UK? Were you going to move if you hadn't met Geoffrey and married him?
No. I never really liked England. I mean, I knew that they had a condescension chromosome when it came to Australians, that they saw us as a sort of recessive gene. So, no, I had no intention to move there, but there was a writer's strike in LA, and I came back to Sydney, met Jeff, and we had one of those just, that we fell in love at first sight, actually. He was doing a hypothetical, and I sat in for Kylie Minogue. And he always says to me now, if Kylie had been there, he'd be Mr. Minogue. And I'm like, in your wet dreams, Robertson. But we did fall madly in love, yeah. So suddenly I found myself living in the enemy camp in a way. Not just living in the enemy camp, but then I had a child who had special needs. I was away from my family, my sisters, my mother. It was terribly isolating. And also they were very hostile. England's changed a lot. It's much more cosmopolitan
I was going to
now.
ask you about that, whether you've come round full circle and you embrace the English now.
Well,
they certainly embrace you.
Well, it's odd, isn't it? I mean, I think people can only hurt you if you allow them to hurt you. So when they were very condescending and they'd say things like, oh, Australian Vogue, surely a contradiction in terms, and all those kinds of little comments they would make, I just thought it was hysterical. I used to just write down the dialogue and put it straight into books. And I think and I've come to really love living there, and I've got a lot of wonderful friends there, and I've sort of been accepted. I mean, a year and a half ago, I was going to the Royal Polo, and Clarence House had rung me up and said, well, we can see you're coming to the Polo. Would you like to give the cups to the princes? And I thought, okay. So they must have been very low on celebrities that day, like limbo low. So I said to the organiser, what do I do? And he said, well, you just kiss them on the cheek and present the cup. And Prince William was walking towards me, and I said to him, he looked really bored. And I said, apparently I have to kiss you. Do you want tongue? And Prince William went, oh, perhaps later. And then he went back and told the others, and they're killing themselves. And Prince Harry came towards you. I said, do you want tongue? And he's like, oh, yeah. And he picked me up. I rode him around the paddock and everything. And I thought they were so relieved not to be treated like porcelain people, And Australians have that ability. We can be irreverent and mischievous and get away with it because they think, oh, she's Antipodean, she can't help it,
I want to ask you something about your humour. A review of your latest book, The Boy Who Fell to Earth, said, Lette is a good writer and there's real heart at the core of this book. She's also very funny. The only problem being that she tries to be funny so often that readers end up feeling a bit hammered by the humour. Is that a fair comment?
I don't know. I think when we're together, we do laugh a lot. And anthropologists back this up. Anthropologists say that women in all societies laugh more than men, especially in all female groups. And I think with women, it's a case of laugh or your mascara runs. We have a lot to deal with. Like, for example, I'm 54 now, menopause, having my own weather. And I thought, God, all the things women go through in life, from period cramps to childbirth, where you stretch your birth canal the customary 5 kilometres, to mastitis and menopause, and then just when everything goes quiet, do you know what happens? You grow a beard. I could make a macrame hanging basket. I'm going to try and get a grant from the Australia Council, do something interesting. So I think for us, laughter is a survival mechanism.
So is humour, in a sense, a mask? Because I don't believe for a second that Kathy Lette's life has always been about fun and great shoes and handbags and mixing with the princes.
Right. Well, I suppose you do use comedy as a defence mechanism, because it does, if you can deflect a serious question with a quip, you've saved yourself having to strip off your emotional underwear in any way. You might not have your best pants on. So I do use it as a defence mechanism. I think that's absolutely true. And the reason I was so nervous about writing this book, in fact, I didn't mean to write it. I was going to write something else. But then this other book started pouring out of my pen, and I was so angst-riddled and fraught about whether I should admit that this book was based on my own life, that I have a child on the autistic spectrum. And I lost sleep, I lost weight, I rang my sisters and my mother and all my girlfriends, because I was worried, writing about my child, the experiences that were inspired by my own son. Would people think I was exploiting him? Was I invading his privacy, etc.? But one thing I have learnt from that is that the response has only been positive. And I've realised it's always better to shine a light into a dark place. And if you can help in any way to destigmatise a condition like autism, then you're doing everybody a service, including yourself, because people now understand why I'm often to be seen swinging from a chandelier drinking alcohol, because, I've had a bad day. So I have learnt that lesson. It is always good to be honest and open.
I know it's a long time ago, because Jules, your son, is 22 now.
Yes.
But when he was born and when you realised that something wasn't quite right, did you feel guilty?
Absolutely guilty. I kept thinking, was it something I drank? Was it something I ate? Was it that one glass of wine in the final trimester? And you go through various stages of grief, I suppose. Because when Jules was born, he walked early, talked early. A lot of mothers say this to me about their child. And then suddenly it's like their computer crashes and they just lose their language, they get repetitive in their behaviour, and you can't understand what's happened. So we got the diagnosis when Jules was 3, and when they said the word autism then, that was like it was like a knife being plunged into your heart. That was a diagnosis that dragged you straight down into the dark. So, of course, the first thing you do is denial. I refused to believe that my child was going to be labelled in this way. So, and if there's any other mothers in the audience who have a child on the spectrum, I'm sure you can understand this. You bankrupt yourself seeing every medical expert on the planet. And then after that, you go through the whole guilt stage, and then you go through grief, and then you go through the why me's, and that gets a bit ugly for a while, And then finally you think to yourself, well, you just start to accept that this is the unique little person you've been given, and you just have to do your best by them. And of course, then you realise they also bring so much to your life.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because it's a development disability.
Yes.
So, because Julius is now at university and he lives on his own.
Well, with a lot of support. But if anyone doesn't know what autism is, it's a lifelong neurological condition, and its chief characteristics are an inability to communicate, not very good social skills.
No filter,
often chronic OCD and anxiety, no filter, so they say whatever they're thinking, which means that, socially, you sweat more than, George Bush doing Scrabble, because you never, ever know what they're going to say. And often, I'm not often speechless, but my son can leave me completely speechless often. But they also have this lateral, literal, tangential logic, which means they look at the world in the most amazing and unusual way. So without a doubt, I think my son has made me more compassionate, less judgmental, but also more open to people who are different. And that's got to be a good thing.
But you speak about, he's obviously your son and Jeffrey's.
Yes.
I mean, were there times that it was really rock bottom?
Yes.
Somebody was mentioning to me the other day that they have a friend who has a son who's autistic, and sometimes they don't know whether to throw him off the building or whether they want to jump themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, did you have moments where you were really at your wits' end?
Oh, yes. I mean, there's many dark and harrowing and heartbreaking times, because when you have a child who's different, other parents judge you. So I used to call the sandbox the quick sandbox, because we'd be at the park and Jules would just do anything that was slightly unusual or erratic or a little bit eccentric, and other parents glower at you as though you're a bad mother, and they pull their child away as though your child has some contagious leprosy or something. And the other time I found it really difficult, and I'm sure some of the mums here will relate to this, when became a teenager, and all my friends' kids were going down the Amazon or up the Himalayas, or they were doing work experience in top barristers' chambers and things. And it's like being at an amazing banquet, and you can smell this lovely aroma coming out, and you're just sort of standing there with your nose pressed up against the glass, starving, and you feel so left out. That I found particularly hard. But Jules now, with a lot of help and support and everything, I mean, he's the most wonderful human being. I love him so much. He's at university doing an acting course. He's living away in his flat 4 nights a week. He's got a gorgeous girlfriend. So he's on his sort of life L plates. And, we now know with diagnostic hindsight that a lot of amazingly extraordinary, interesting people were on the autistic spectrum, from Mozart, Van Gogh, Orwell, Einstein. I mean, Steve Jobs, I would say, definitely. All those mad scientists. So with the right help, people on the autistic spectrum could give back to society in the most wonderful way. But unfortunately, only 15% of people on the autistic spectrum are in the workforce, which is much lower than other people in the disability group. So I think we just have to learn to be more accepting and realise that they will tell you look fat in something or whatever. I mean, Jules has done terribly embarrassing things to me. I took him to a function once with Anne Widdecombe. Do you know who she is? She's a very, an old battle axe, Tory politician. And I took her to Jules to this charity event. He was probably about 14. I said, "Oh, Jules, this is Anne Widdecombe." And Jules said, "Oh, yes, you're the one my mother says is two-faced. But if so, why are you wearing that one when it's all wrinkly and crinkly and old?" And I'm going, ha, 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 ha. And then I took him to Downing Street some other time, and he met Tony Blair. And I said, "Jules, this is the Prime Minister, Tony Blair." And Julius just looked at him and said, "Oh, yes, you're the one my mother calls Tony blah, blah, blah." And I mean, there's nowhere to go, is there? What can you say? So you do have to strap a shock absorber to your brain for those moments, yeah.
You've often said that you write because it's cheaper than therapy.
Totally.
Is it true?
Yeah. And I always write the book I wish I'd had when I was going through something. So whether I wrote, Puberty Blues was for all those other surfy girls, to show them that they were more than just a life support system to a pair of breasts. And then I wrote books about being a single girl in Sydney and trying to find a man who wasn't married or gay, or married and gay. I've written books about childbirth and motherhood and raising a teenage daughter, and everything that's happened to me in my life I've somehow turned into material, but hopefully as a kind of survival guide and a manual for other women coming up behind me. Yeah, definitely.
Women and ageing.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Now, I know you've said things like, age is to a woman like kryptonite is to Superman.
That's true, that's right.
A woman can believe that, but doesn't the rest of society have to believe that too?
Once a woman reaches 50, it's considered that you've passed your amuse-by date and you're put out to pasture. We hardly see any women our own age on television. I mean, I don't do Botox or any of that stuff, but I never see anyone who looks like me on television. I think I don't believe in all that cosmetic surgery. I think, men should read between my lines. It's all there. But I never see anyone reflecting that. And of course, in movies, it's the same.
So how does that change, or how does it begin to change?
Well, at my age, what's distressing me now, a lot of my women friends are being traded in for younger models. because we're in our 50s, and I don't see them for a while, and then I suddenly see these breasts arriving, down the main street. They do these terrible things to themselves to stay young, and they're having breast implants and the collagen like that, which is basically they take the fat out of their bottoms and inject it into their lips, so they're literally talking out of their backsides. And then I see them at the gym and they're waxing everything off to look like little girls, and I think, why are they doing that? I mean, you never hear me say this in any other context, but bring back Bush. Am I not wrong? And my logic on all of that is, I say to them, but why would you want a man who only wants you because you're silicone from tonsils to toenails? You don't want a man like that. It's a good litmus test. So I just think we have to be more strident about getting more women, real women, on television. So yeah, I'm a big believer in ageing naturally, although I'm going to get my sunspots taken off. Look at that. That's from being a surfy girl. Wear sunblock, that's what I'm saying to you.
Are we as a society obsessed by monogamy?
Oh, what a good question. Yes. Look, things have changed because once upon a time I would say to everybody, yes, monogamy, how lovely to fall in love forever. But marriages last so long now. I mean, from honeymoon to tomb can be 100 years, for God's sake. That's a long time to find someone's anecdotes interesting, isn't it? And interestingly enough, the divorce rate in Australia, I mean, the two peak times for divorce, first of all, the majority of divorces now are initiated by women, and the two peak times are when the last child finishes school and when the husband retires. And I think it's got a lot to do with longevity because, now that women are economically independent, we're not tethered to the husband by the apron strings, we can say, well, no, I've had enough of this. And one of the problems is that, of course, when women go through the menopause, our estrogen goes down and our testosterone comes up. So suddenly we want to go out and, go travel the world and have adventures. Whereas men, it's the opposite. Their testosterone goes down and their estrogen comes up. And they want to stay at home and sit on the couch and nest. And, of course, as a mother, oh, my God, I have probably cooked thousands of flocks of lamb, schools of smokes of salmon. I don't want to ever go anywhere near the kitchen again. But it's a crisis point. And we have something we have to address in our aging society. That otherwise, the silver divorce rate is going to really skyrocket. But monogamy, I think we need to be maybe a little bit more French about these things and a little bit more forgiving. What do you think, girls? Yeah. My only French is rendezvous, liaison. Champagne, lingerie, and croissant. Do I need more? I don't know.
And an interesting question that came up via social media from Marley Boyle was Julian Assange your worst ever house guest?
Well, I have a real soft spot for Julian, not least because I think he might be on the spectrum. Have any of you had that thought? I think he might be. So when he came to stay with us...
Did you have that discussion with him?
Yes, I have had that discussion. He's yet to be convinced of my diagnosis, but I just mothered him. I just felt he needed a lot of mothering. And because Jeff's a human rights lawyer, we have a lot of interesting people staying in our attic. I've had, opposition leaders on the run, and I've had various journalists who are hiding out. Salman Rushdie was in our attic during the fatwa. We even had Hewitt when he was having the affair with Diana. Everyone was searching for him, and Jeff was running the Republican movement at the time, the anti-monarchy. So we took that case. He was in the attic, and Julian Assange was in the attic. I always joke that I've had everyone in the attic but Anne Frank. Everyone. But Julian had absolutely no house skills. That's absolutely true. But then again, he's another one of those guys who's got this incredible intellect, and he doesn't kind of exist in the real world. I mean, that's how he can survive in the embassy, because he's just focused on his work so much. I do go down and see him quite often, although I went down the other day. It's the only place in London where you don't have to tie your bike up outside because there's 4 policemen outside. And I often just cycle down to see him and cheer him up and stuff. And I got there the other day and I just put my bike there and said hello to the policeman and started walking in. Normally the police are so nice, they're so charming. But this one guy, this one day, was really officious. And he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm just going into the embassy." He said, "Do you have an appointment?" And I said, yeah. And he said, who are you seeing? And I said, Julian Assange. And he said, what's your name? Now, I don't have to tell him anything, really. So by this stage, I'm annoyed. And I said, well, my name's Kathy Lette, and I'm his sex slave. And I'm here because, it's time for me to service him. And I went on and on and on in this vein. And just laughing. I won't tell you all the things I said. It was quite rude. And then when I got inside, I was just laughing, and I told Julian, and he said, oh, Kath, that's going to be written up now as an official report with my photo and everything. You must never joke with bureaucracy, ever. But no, I am very fond of him. And also, I think with WikiLeaks, why shouldn't we know what our governments do in our name? And the Pentagon just had to admit during the Bradley Manning trial, as we always knew, that not one person was harmed because of the WikiLeaks. They had to admit under oath that that was true.
Before I let you go, your first bite at fame with Puberty Blues, as you said, was when you were 19. So you've been in the limelight. You've been successful for at least 3 decades and hopefully more.
Yeah, even longer, yeah.
Is that a burden to you?
Well, the best thing, the lovely thing about if you write books that have a resonance is that you get to meet so many wonderful women. That's the highlight of my career. It's strange now, though, having Puberty Blues being resurrected, because actually this is my 4th puberty. I had puberty, then I wrote the book, then we had the movie, and now I've got the TV series. And as I said, as I'm menopausal, it's very hormonally confusing. I'm getting wrinkles and pimples. It's too much. Yeah.
What is your own measure of success?
My own measure of success is that I have my son finally living a little bit of independent life. That, to me, is better than winning the Pulitzer Prize. It's better than anything I could achieve on my own. To see him thriving is it's just the happiest thing that could happen. Yeah. Don't stop me. The hormones. Yeah. Yeah.